Okay, this is pretty much unrehearsed, but hopefully it will give you a fairly good idea of how to use the schematic side of things, or the electrical harness side of things, in Inventor Professional. So you can draw this out on a piece of paper. I usually just draw out my harnesses in AutoCAD Electrical. Just makes things easy, keeps it tidy, but I've done the same thing from hand-drawn sketches. It really doesn't make too much difference. So I've got here, I've labelled my connectors, Con 1, Con 2, Con 3 and Con 4. It's just a very, very basic harness, and it should give you a fairly good idea of how to go about making something that's much larger. Now, I've never had much success with using the Inventor AutoCAD Electrical connectivity. Probably haven't invested enough time in it, but I found that it was very difficult to set up, because some of the jobs that I've worked on, I've had between 3 and 6 harnesses in a single job, and AutoCAD Electrical didn't really seem to want to connect with those, so I've just usually gone and just drawn up the harness, and here I'll usually get the wire information here and just add it to the connector information so that I know what wire number and color I'm using. But we'll just flip over to Inventor now, and I've got a harness demo assembly here with just an earth moving mining truck fuel tank here, and it's purely just as some geometry. So here is my 12-pin Deutsch connector. I've got a 2-pin over here, and I've got a 4-pin and a 4-pin, and if you take a look back at this, I've got 2 4-pin connectors, a 12-pin and a 2-pin. So the first thing you want to do is place your connectors, but before you do that, if you have a connector drawn up, you can see here I've labelled all of those. What you need to do is actually publish this, not necessarily to the content center, but you have to create a connector component. And if you go to your drop down menu here, just make sure the harness checkbox is got the tick next to it, because then you can add pins to your connector. So if you click on the pin, and you can click on points, you can see there it's coming up there, it would give me an extra pin, and you can see here that I've just got all my pins labelled here, and they just correspond with the numbers. And you can see what I've also done here is just an offset from the end of the connector. This is where I'm actually going to end my conduit, and then the wires fan out, pretty much like if you have a harness manufactured. That's what you'll see, is the braid that holds all the wires together will sort of end a little bit short of where the connector is, and then the wires will come out, and then generally they'll put a rubber boot or something between the two to help waterproof it. But once you've got your connector harness pins there, you then have to go to the Manage tab, and just here you have to author a connector. And I've just got here the direction the pins are coming out, or the wires are coming out, is out this way, and because I want to, basically with this sort of connector, the wire actually goes into the connector and then it's fixed, so I've just said that it's got 10 mil of embedded length, but you can mess around with that. And if you just select this face, go to this point here and just click OK, and then you get that message, and that way you can use the parts in the electrical harness. So I'm just going to close that. Now I have made this quick assembly and I've saved it. Next thing I need to do is go to my environments and select cable and harness. Now that's going into the correct folder, so I click OK. But now if you go here, right click and say harness settings, and just wire roundup usually I've used fairly large harnesses, so I select about a 5mm roundup, and that as well. It just keeps everything nice and even when you go to make your nail board drawing. Wires and cables. I usually like to have everything set so that it sort of looks about the right size. Curvature, natural curves, splices, we'll make that 10, and it's just an offset. If you put a splice in, you can select a bit of geometry and it'll just offset the splice from that. Settings, segments, again, we'll make that as rendered. Offset, we'll make that 10mm, and that again, you just redefine your segment node and it'll just offset it from whatever it is you're trying to wrap it around. And if you want to change that, I'm just going to choose a color here. We'll make it violet. Ribbon cable, we're not using that. File locations. By default, this will want to go to the public folder where your design data is set, but I once lost a lot of information after a computer was stolen, and I was just using all the default settings with Inventor, and I didn't have my cable and harness information in my main workspace. It was still in the public folder, and when the backup was made of the job, luckily I had a backup that had some of the information. It didn't collect the wire library, so whilst the model file had all the wires, it had no wire information, and it took about 8 hours to open the model file, and all of the wires were default thickness, default information, and so I lost a lot of time and a lot of work on that. So usually what I'll do is I copy my design data into my workspace. And I map everything so that all my file paths point to the design data being in the local workspace, so it gets backed up. So I can just browse here, workspace, and I believe it is in the wire settings, and I made a copy here just as a bit of a backup, but I've also made my own wiring library here just by editing the file once it gets in. So I'm just going to click OK on all that. And now if I go to create a wire, you can see here TE, and then here's all my wires. Now you can actually edit the library by just clicking up here, and you can see here, if I want that, I can just even copy that. I can then double click and start to edit any of these properties here, colors, whatever you like, to add wires to your collection. So that is basically the first setup for getting the harness prepared to start to take it from AutoCAD Electrical and replicate that in Inventor so that you can make your nail board drawing and run the harness.